What's up, you creepy fucks, and welcome to the Let's Talk Horror Channel podcast, where we have very honest, very unrated, unfiltered conversations about something from the world of horror right here in the Creep Zone. And this episode is something that I'm very excited about because this sort of feels like a proper old school Let's Talk Horror episode because we are talking about a movie that is the foundations of what horror is for what we know that horror is today, and it is a very important one. This podcast, as I started it over 4 years ago now, it always was about going in depth, talking about not just the movies themselves and going like that movie's good, that movie's shit. It's also about going through what and I'm going to say the word that everybody knows that I say and they're probably sick of it. The iconography of what horror is, and the iconography of what this movie is that we're going to be talking about, which is obviously George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead. It is truly one of the iconic movies of this genre. And as I said, we are going to get into all of that. And there's no better person that I would love to have on this episode with me than Erik, a good friend of obviously of mine now. I'd say that you're a friend. I hope you're a friend of mine, but also a friend of the show. I've been on his fantastic show. He's been on this show before, so you will know him. But we have Erik from Cradle to the Grave podcast. Hello, Erik.
What's up, you creepy fuck, BP? Has anybody ever retorted with your creepy fuck?
Only in real life.
Intro.
You
keep calling us creepy fucks. I'm gonna call you a creepy fuck. BP.
Absolutely. I'm happy to have it back at me.
Yes, BP. I do consider you a friend. We have been going on, like I started my podcast about 2 years ago. I know you've been doing this 4 years, but from the get-go, man, you were one of the first people I reached out to because I was digging what you were doing. And I've had you on a couple of times, many times. You're coming on soon to chat about a movie from 1998. Was it 98?
I think so, yeah.
Fallen came out? Yeah,
that's it. I'm very excited about that because that's a movie that had a huge impact on me. When you get to the end of that movie, that's when that movie hits you and you're like, fuck. And that
man, I can't even remember anything about Fallen. Like,
that's good.
I haven't seen it since it came out, so I'm looking forward to revisiting it.
Yeah,
but yeah, dude, it's super stoked to be back on Let's Talk Horror to chat about, like you said, man, a movie that pretty much started it all, didn't it?
Yeah, it's a big movie. It really, truly is. And as I always say as well, as I said, Erik's here from Cradle to the Grave. He will be, all of you are or should be listening to it anyway. If you're not, you're absolutely mental because it's fantastic. Because like I said at the start, we're talking about a movie that we can talk about and deep dive into this movie because of the iconography and the importance of this movie. And that is what Erik is doing with Cradle to the Grave. It's a fantastic podcast that I love being on. And he's going to promote absolutely everything about it later on as well. So
that's all I'm going to talk about. I only came here to talk about my podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Fuck Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Night of the Living Dead and how it can reference Cradle to the Grave and so on like that. But yeah, it's a fantastic podcast. He's going to promote absolutely everything at the end to find out where you can go and enjoy it because it's so good. But as we've both said, we're here to talk about Night of the Living Dead, a movie that is truly fundamental to what horror is. And what's really interesting about this movie is that even on the watch that I did the other night, when obviously to do all my prep for the episode and stuff, and this is a movie that I think I even said to you that I don't know if I've seen it for around 10 years. But this was a movie that when I was younger, I watched a lot because once again, it's a movie that you can sort of learn from because you start, and as I said, we're going to get into all of this, but you sort of learn and understand horror a little bit more as where it came from. But over the time, it's just a movie that I've popped on. But yeah, I don't think I'd watch this for long time. But when you watch this movie, and that's why I'm so excited about talking about it, is that you really, truly see the influence of what everything came after it when you watch this movie. Even to this day, you see that influence, which is insane. So the film was released in 1968, which is mental because then you start thinking about it and you're like, hang on, that was like, what does that fucking make it? Does that make it 60 years old? Almost 60?
No, man, like it's I would say, well, 55,
Well, Jaws is
56 years
50,
old.
so yeah, so it's 60. It's like 62, I think, because Jaws is
It's hella
50.
old, man. It's almost as old as me.
But yeah, so this film was like 1968. It was released. It's directed by obviously the iconic, the legendary George Romero. It's starring Dwayne Jones, Judith O'Dea. That's obviously I'm saying all these
Sounds
names
good to
wrong.
me.
Carl Hardman, Marilyn Eastman, Kyra Sean Scone. I don't know. Scone's an English thing that we over here.
I love
Uh,
scones, man.
yeah, absolutely. Keith Wayne and Judith Riley. And obviously, there's a shitload of zombies. I'm not going to go through all the names of all this. It sits at 7.8 on IMDb and 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. So this is, take that in, that this is a movie from 1968 and it still is so highly respected critically that we still are sitting at Rotten Tomatoes. If you give a shit about the Rotten Tomatoes, 95%, which is great, and 7.8 on IMDb, which, as we always say, that on IMDb, if you get anything that's 6 or more, you're practically an Oscar winner. So it's such a great, such a great critical reception this film still gets, which is, I'd say since 1968 is insane still.
It's true, man. I mean, but that's just a testament to, what Romero did with this film. Like, of course, there were horror movies before this that are iconic and that laid the foundation, and that are beloved. The original Dracula, Frankenstein from 1931, even Nosferatu from 1922. Like, yeah, when you think of horror, those are the Godfathers. But the birth of the modern horror film,
Yeah,
what we're living in the modern age right now, you trace it back to, I feel, two movies. I tend to go towards Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974, but my co-host in Cradle to the Grave, Stephen Bissett, believes that the birth of the modern horror movie started here with Night of the Living Dead. And I flip back and forth. When I watch Texas Chainsaw, I mean, that movie changed the game as far as like what horror can do, what it's capable of, how it can infiltrate our psyche, society, and every movie after Texas Chainsaw has owes it a debt of gratitude. Like, that movie holds up incredibly well. Um, but with all that said, when I recently revisited Night of the Living Dead for our chat, I'm like, maybe Stephen Bissett was right. Maybe this is the birth of the modern horror film. Because, man, anything before Night of the Living Dead pales in comparison to what Romero did in this film. And that's why its legacy is cemented. That's why it's beloved. I mean, you talk to any horror fan, they're not going to say this movie's shit. It has its faults, as all movies do, but everybody loves this film, dude. Everyone.
yeah, and you're exactly right. Once again, like it's about, and we're going. I mean, I'll go into everything in a minute. We're going to talk about the movie, but you're exactly right. Like if you look at like a sort of time frame of what horror is, you're exactly right. You go back to say Nosferatu 1922, like you said. Then you've got say 30s onwards. You've got the Universal monsters and so on like that. You start breaking into say like the 50s and the 60s, and you've got big influences such as say like the Twilight Zone. And then you've
Mhm.
also got Hitchcock, and obviously Hitchcock is
Oh
obviously even in
yeah.
this movie you can see the influence of Hitchcock
Mhm.
in this. But then that's when horror changed, and that's why the importance of Night of the Living Dead is because Night of the Living Dead, although it is definitely influenced, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, definitely influenced from the movies that did come before it, and a lot of that is down to the technical aspect of the movie, the setup of the shots and so on like that. But it felt it must have been mental seeing this in 1968
I know, man.
because this still to this day, and you're exactly right, this is the type of movie that was one of the foundations of creating, exactly like you said, the modern day horror, because this film has a lot of things in it that I can't really think of many movies before it that had it at this sort of level where you're like, this is a horror movie. Hitchcock was so technically gifted, and the way that he delivered on suspense and so on, and the way that he shot that and filmed that and wrote that into a story and so on, and the performances in Hitchcock. But this doesn't feel like a Hitchcock movie. This doesn't feel like a 50s, a 60s, a
Well,
40s horror.
it goes places that Hitchcock never went before
Yeah,
this. Hitchcock tried to go places after this, like, Frenzy. I think it was from, like, 1976 or 77. Like, he's pushing the envelope. But before, his earlier films, like, he doesn't really get the gore aspect isn't there. The horror aspect, it's not as in your face as Night is. And that's the brilliance of Night of the Living Dead is this movie feels like a Hitchcock film. It's black
yeah,
and white. It has the moody music. It's eerie. But then it fucking goes into overdrive and it goes places that no other horror film went before this. And it, and again, that's why it is legendary, and that's why it's iconic and a classic, and why we're talking about it all these years later as the movie that started it all.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So in regards to, we're going to go back a little bit, but in regards to basic sort of info, Google synopsis wise. Now, as usual, I always say that I assume and I would hope that anybody that is watching this or listening to this, then obviously I hope that you have seen this movie. If you haven't, then you might want to go and watch it first, because we're going to be talking about it all. But in this, on Google synopsis wise, we have a group of unsuspecting people get trapped in an old farmhouse after the dead unexpectedly, because I can't speak, rise from the grave and seek the living as food. Sounds like they're trying to get a quick, fast meal, like a McDonald's or something like that. But that's pretty much it. We start off the movie with two characters, two lovebirds, so to speak. And what I really like about this movie is that it doesn't hold back in regards to like getting straight into it. We're introduced to these two characters. We've got, why I can't, obviously I forget, I can't forget Barbara, but I can't remember the guy's name, which is
Johnny.
fucking Johnny. That's it, of course it is. But we're introduced to Johnny and Barbara, which is spelt Barbara, which is fucking weird to me, because I always thought it was Barbara, but for some reason it's spelt Barbara.
No.
Um, but we're introduced to these people, and then we get obviously some iconic line that is, everybody in the horror universe, and if you know horror, you know the line. Of course, they're coming to get you, Barbara. Such an iconic line, and it's been clipped and used in videos for God knows how well, since '68. So it's such an iconic opening to a movie, because, like I said, we sort of get driven straight into it. You've got these two sort of lovers, and then before we know it, he's taking the piss out of her for being scared, but then a fucking zombie comes along and starts stomping.
Yeah, I love the opening of this film. Um, like I said, it starts off like your average 1960s horror flick, drive-in flick, which was what a lot of people thought they were getting into when this premiered in '68. I know there was a review by Roger Ebert where he went to go see it opening day. It was like a matinee, and there's fucking kids, 9-year-olds, because they're used to tame horror films. Let's go see Night of the Living Dead. It's probably a really cool movie, and kids can go. And he said that it fucked everybody up. like,
Yeah, I'm sure it did. I mean, an opening like that, like I said, like when I watch this movie now, I like to try and just take myself back to '68, and like you're saying, like this is something that they hadn't seen before, and obviously weren't anticipating, weren't even thinking in their wildest nightmares, so to speak, because it ain't a dream for a lot of these people that they would see something like this. And what I love about this is that it already sets up the movie for what it is. It gets straight into it. But one of the things that, and this is going to be a recurring thing that I'll talk about throughout the episode, because of this is something that really truly shows the impact of what it had on modern day horror, is that this is an incredibly violent movie. And straight off the bat, the first attack that we get from the zombie who's attacking Johnny and Barbara, it's so violent that still to this day it's so visceral, and visceral in the way that it's shot, and the way that it it feels like almost like a real fight. You know what I mean? Like this guy is really still fighting for his life against this zombie that he's like, what the fuck is going on? This guy, old guy's just trying to fight me, and he doesn't know that he's just trying to chomp down on his brains, you know, and just trying to have a free lunch. But it's so violent, that scene, that you're like, shit, that's really setting up what the rest of the film's gonna be. And like even now you're like, man, that must have fucked them right up in 68 seeing that.
For sure. Um, I want to slow down a little bit on this opening, BP. I
Yeah,
got some things to say, dude. That's why you
yeah,
brought me on, right? To say things.
absolutely.
So I'm gonna put the brakes on for before we get any further because I want to dwell a little bit on this opening. You know, revisiting it for our chat. It's been years since I've seen it, and the first time I saw Night of the Living Dead was probably because it was everywhere growing up in the 80s because there was no copyright on this. So any motherfucker who had a projection can play Night of the Living Dead without having to get the rights, right? So it was all over the place. And I never really liked it as a kid because I was used to Dawn of the Dead. I was used to Day of the Dead. I
Okay.
saw those movies first before I saw Night. I'm like, this is a black and white 1960s film. I don't want nothing to do with it. Right. So I always just bypassed it. I dismissed it. Like, it's not as cool. It doesn't have the gore. Right. So I never really got into Night of the Living Dead until later on. As an adult and realized that I was a stupid kid, like didn't know what he was talking about. Then I got into it, and then I realized the masterpiece that it is. But it's so cool, like revisiting it every 10 years or so, you see more things than you didn't notice the last time you watched it. It's like the comic book Watchmen. You ever read Watchmen by Alan Moore, BP? Yeah. It's like every time you read it,
Yeah,
you
I
see
think I
you
have.
see
Yeah.
something new. Yeah, you see something new every time you read that. Every time I watch Night of the Living Dead, I see something new or I feel something new. And I don't even know if Romero put as much thought into this. You know, he's gone on record to say like, yeah, I know there's social commentary about Night of the Living Dead and about politics and race relations, but I just wanted to make a cool horror film, right?
Yeah.
I don't believe Romero. I think he's
No.
too smart. I think he's too smart of a man to not understand what he was doing and what he was putting on screen and the subtext that this movie has. And you pick up on it right away. At least I did from the opening of this movie. It's the slow car driving. You got that Night of the Living Dead logo, and you got the music, right? And then I really felt like watching that car drive up into the cemetery, and you have a cemetery sign, cemetery ahead, and it looks like it's been shot up by a gun, right? It's all blasted, and you see this car turn the corner and disappear. That to me, it feels like it's says our world before Night of Living Dead and our world after Night of Living Dead. And
Right.
that
Okay. Yeah.
car is us, and we are going into the world of zombies, into the world of Night of Living Dead that George has created, because the zombie genre film did not exist before this film. There were zombie movies, but they were different. They were just hypnotized people. So that car to me represents the world entering the graveyard, so to speak, that Romero created. And as they're driving into the graveyard, you see the American flag. At the time in 1968, America was in turmoil, right? We had JFK assassination, Robert Kennedy assassination, the Vietnam War, civil rights. Fucking America was fucked up big time, BP, right? In 1968. And this movie reflects a lot of the undercurrent of what was going on, you know. And Romero, like I said, man, he's a smart man, and I think he's putting in this imagery on purpose, right? And so yeah, and then like you said, from then on, we get the iconic "They're coming to get you, Barbara," and that still sends chills down your spine, man.
Yeah.
And it makes you chuckle too, because we're like, "Oh man, that's so good," and that has
Yeah.
lasted the test of time. It's lasted the test of time, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love the opening of this film. I'm in for the ride. And after the opening, there are some lags, like I feel like the middle section, which we'll get to, there's some dips, but then it ramps back up again. It's a roller coaster ride, man.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this film, in regards to, you know, if you're talking about like a story structure and so on like that, there's not much to it. It's a very simple movie, but sometimes, and I spoke about this recently on another episode, that sometimes it's the what make you know when movies don't have a complicated story or a complex story, what makes them exciting is the complexity of the other things, of the characters. And we obviously have, you know, some complex characters in this which are driving a more complex idea for the story rather than the structure of what it is. Essentially the movie is, we have the opening and then they go and lock themselves in this house, and then that's basically where they're just, you know, they lock themselves down because they've got all these things outside and they want to try and, it's just a movie about survival, and that is purely it until we get to you know, the fucked up ending that we do, that we'll talk about. But that is, on a structure, on a story standpoint, that is how simple this movie is. But
Mhm.
the complexity comes with the characters, and the complexity comes with the beautiful cinematography that we still get in this movie. Talking about the cinematography, because obviously it's always such a huge part of this. Now, I said at the start that Hitchcock is quite clearly a huge influence in regards to the look of this movie. But what I also find really funny about when I watch this movie is that sometimes this movie looks like a proper low budget movie in regards to, like, they've got the handheld camera and you can tell they're like, shit, we can only fit ourselves into this small little space to film this, so we're gonna have to do it. Or like, oh shit, we can't do there because the lighting's bad, so we have to go here, even though it might not look as good as over there by that tree. So there's moments in it when you're like, oh okay, like you can see like the low budget nature of this movie. But then you have like some shots where the lighting is absolutely phenomenal. You've got these
Mhm.
beautiful Dutch angles, tilted shots, low shots, you know, like, but once again, these are shots that obviously you know, are very Hitchcock, but also they are sort of known throughout the history now of what horror is. You know, you look at movies like Night of the Living Dead, but then you can look at movies like The Evil Dead, and you can go, shit, like,
Sure.
there's so much influence in something like The Evil Dead with what Sam Raimi did with the way that he shoots Evil Dead from very low on the floor, or tilting the angles. And obviously, a lot of The Evil Dead is set in this cabin, and when you see movies like Night of the Living Dead, you can see the influence of even something like the cinematography and the technical aspect in movies later on, and we still see that to the day. So once again, it's a movie that almost invented or was part of the foundations of what horror cinematography is as well. So there's another, like, sort of like, you know, bow to its, you know, whatever chain or whatever you call it, you know, like another little tick box that it has in regards to helping the iconography of horror. It's the cinematography in this is great. And also, I know a lot of people don't like black and white movies, and in fact, it is something that can put people off. But
Mhm.
this movie is absolutely fucking gorgeous in black and white. This is
Oh,
such a
dude.
stunning movie.
There's like a colorized version out there. I don't know if you've
Yeah,
watched it. Don't.
no, no, it just
Stay
sort of
away.
ruins it in a way.
Yeah, it does. I'm glad it was shot in black and white. It really adds to it.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, once again, what's cool about it is that it does then sort of, it lends itself into both sort of times. It lends itself into that Universal monster time, that Twilight Zone,
Mhm.
the, you know, obviously Psycho and Hitchcock movies, but
Mhm.
also it lends itself to everything past because of what it was creating with. You know, the ferociousness and the violent nature of what the film that at that point people hadn't seen. So the movie itself, even when I sat there the other day and watching it, I was like, this is such a fantastic looking movie still. That really, honestly, well, it is a movie that you can see the inspiration that it created after it from other filmmakers, you know, that came after it in the 70s and in the 80s and so on like that. You know, you can see the influence in regards to this movie on a technical aspect of what George A. Romero did. Yeah, some of it might look like shit because they was running with a camera trying to film something, but when he gets to set up the shots, they look bloody lovely, and I absolutely
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah, I agree, man. Like he drew a lot of inspiration from the EC comics of the day with the Dutch angles. It's very comic book type framing, which Romero again revisits in Creepshow, which
Yeah,
is overtly comic book inspired. But I think EC comics had a big influence just with the story of Night of the Living Dead as well. We have undead returning from the grave to wreak vengeance on whoever did them wrong. That's like a common EC comic story. And so, yeah, I think he's deliberately putting in, that those Dutch angles and framing things and lighting things in a way that's very comic book esque and very German expressionistic, film noir with the shadows. And I always crack up that there's a shot of the naked lady where they're trying to cover her
yeah,
butt with the shadow.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
somebody in the background with like, all right, cover the butt.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I've got that in my notes as well. That's one thing that like I can imagine the absolute like aghast that they must have been at seeing that. They're like,
I
oh,
know
cover your eyes, cover your eyes. There's a naked lady on screen. There's a butt like just in front of everyone on this big screen.
that. I know that was probably more horrific than them eating entrails of human beings. Like, oh,
Yeah,
a naked woman.
that's it. You can imagine like the news reports where like this movie is banned, not because of the horrific imagery of back then, but the fact that there's a fucking big ass in the screen,
Yeah,
But that's what it was like, Now it's obviously especially in the 80s horror, all it was tits and ass.
yeah.
But yeah. But one of the things that I can say it was weird watching it as well is that one of the things that I do sometimes find difficult with this movie, and even when I watched it the other day, is that I never feel like the music quite suits it because the music it feels very almost like you got the old school like sci-fi like alien
Well, they had
monster
to
sort of
use
movies.
they used like music that wasn't copyrighted, so they like
Yeah,
go to the
exactly. Yeah,
library and get like some fucking, old recording. But I do like when the zombies are eating the people, there's like this weird like drone like
yeah.
that kind of freaks me out, man.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like the movie, like the music, sort of makes it feel like an old, like drive-in sci-fi movie.
It
Like
does,
that's
yeah.
what it feels like. The movie itself, I don't like. It feels almost too good to be like a B movie. You know what I mean? Like this movie is not a B movie. I never see it as like a B movie. It's like a great, it's a proper horror movie. So, but the music, every time I watch this, I'm just like, I wish that they had their own sort of like, been able to have their own score in this because I feel
Yeah.
like sometimes it felt like there's going to be some sort of weird laser beam and spaceship come down at some point. And so, yeah, so I don't get me wrong. I like and I enjoy the music, but it's like one of those things where I'm
For
like,
sure.
is the music right for the film? But then at the same time, what the fuck can you do about it? Because they couldn't do anything about it. And like you said, they had to go and do whatever they could and create whatever they could about it. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to moan about it too much. It's just one of those things where I'm like, wow, imagine what it would be like with like a designated score to this movie. Then it might have been even better. Or I don't know, maybe it would lessen the
I
iconography
mean,
of
you
what it
could
is.
say that also about the amateur acting, because
Oh yeah,
this was a like almost like a play production. He Romero is casting, actors that usually are doing like local theater type stuff, So not to say that there isn't good acting. I think Dwayne Jones is phenomenal
well
in
this
this
is it.
film.
Yeah, yeah. Well that's
But
it. I mean,
there are some other actors that don't pick up their own weight, and they're a little amateurish. So again, what if it was cast with all-star cast? Would this be as good? Would it be? I don't know. It's hard to
oh, would
say.
it? Yeah, exactly. It's all about once again, like all of this goes to help create what we know in the iconography of what it is and what came after it.
Right.
A lot of horror is always about what ifs, and then also sometimes when you look at those what ifs, you're like, but then you don't want those what ifs sometimes, and
Mm-mm.
that's the thing with a movie like this. But I'm glad that you brought up the performances because that is something that obviously is important to talk about on the show as well, and I always do. And you're exactly right, and I'm glad you said it that Dwayne Jones is fantastic in this. And what I really love about this, so there's what I love about every now and again, that back obviously in the 50s, the 60s, and earlier, you had the sort of the Hollywood starlets. You know what I mean? You had the females that were essentially there, always playing the female, sort of the unfortunate stereotype of what they put females in movies, right? And that's that's what they sort of did. And then the men were always the men, and they're
Right,
the
right.
that's it. But every now and again, that you would always get a movie that felt a little bit different. And you're exactly right, where a lot of movies back at that time, they almost felt like plays. They felt like a production, like a theatre play. But every now and again, you'll get a performance that feels actually very real, and it feels like it's a performance that now, once again, influences the realistic approach of what filmmaking or what a performance in a film is now. For example, one of the big ones for me is always Anthony Perkins in Psycho,
Mhm.
because his performance in that is one of my most influential performances ever. Because when I watch that, I feel like I am watching somebody that's making purposeful decisions to create a character that feels real, and he's doing these things. He's not like hamming it up for the camera and so on. And in this movie, you have obviously Judith O'Dea, who plays Barbara, and she's fucking mental, like she's going like, "Ah," like,
Right.
she's everywhere. She's, and don't get me wrong, like I enjoy her in this, and I enjoy her performance, and
But
I enjoy,
that's her character, man. She starts off that way, even
yeah,
when Johnny's giving her a hard time, like,
yeah,
"Stop it, Johnny, you're scaring me." You can
yeah,
tell
that's it.
she's already on the edge, man. She's like,
Yeah,
she could be
exactly. Yeah,
easily pushed over.
yeah, exactly. She's already distraught from even before we see her, like in the movie. But what I really love, and you're exactly right, with Dwayne Jones, what I love about his performance is that he brings some form of like a realness to it. Like there's a real, like the way he's
Mm,
delivering lines, there's a difference between somebody like, "So they're coming to get you, Barbara," or
mm.
there's or a delivery like, "They're coming to get you, Barbara." Like I mean, there's a huge difference between the difference of hamming it up and having a performance, and the way that Dwayne Jones does his role in this, I think that is a real highlight of the movie, because we have a character who literally his main goal is to survive, and he doesn't give a shit who he fucks over to do that. And that's what I really love about his role and the way he plays it. It's like, oh,
He's
who's this
also, I
person?
mean, I agree with that, but he's also has a tender heart to him. Like,
Yeah,
he finds some shoes for Barbara to wear. Like, he didn't have to do that.
yeah. I
That's
mean,
just
he
shows
does
what
smack
kind
her
of
in the
man he
face.
is. He d Yeah, but she needed to be smacked because she was going fucking crazy, man, and this I think that Ben, Dwayne Jones, he rises to the occasion, and he does what it needs to he does what it he needs to do to survive and to get out of the situation, and with a hysterical person, whether it be woman or man, sometimes you need to slap some sense into 'em. I'm not condoning violence against women. I'm not, of course not. But I think if I was in Ben's shoes and there were living dead people outside and I had a hysterical woman who was driving me crazy and I couldn't think, I would have to do something to get it under control. But you also throw in the fact that Dwayne Jones is a black man. And in 1968, having a black man slap a white woman? I mean, come on. Like, that was unheard of, right?
Yeah.
Again, this movie, it
Whether
subverts
he says it's not, it
expectations.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, so, and I think again, like Romero said, "Oh, well, I didn't write the character of Ben as black." And he probably didn't. But when Dwayne Jones was cast, I'm sure Romero's like, "This is perfect. This is happenstance." Like, now this movie has taken on more subtext. And now that I have the black protagonist, the main guy, um, and in the culture at the time, what was going on in America, Romero knew what he had, man. He's like,
Yeah.
"This is lightning in a bottle. This, I can say something now." And he does. With Ben as the main guy, he's bossing people around. And when Henry comes up out of the cellar, right? The bad guy,
Yeah.
Ben's
Yeah.
like, "When you're up here, you do what I say," right? Like,
Yeah.
he's in charge. And it's fucking awesome, man.
Yeah. And that's so cool, because what I love about it is that Ben is such a great character because he is all about survival and he is all about but you're right, he does have this sort of tendency to him where he knows that he does things wrong within the movie and so on, and he is trying to look after Barbara and so on in a way, and so on. But he is a very interesting character, and I think that
Sure.
it is played to about as best as you possibly can by Dwayne Jones, because he really creates the realism of what the movie is. You know, like I said, if you'd have put a different character, a different person possibly in that role who was like a typical actor of that time, it may have even made it feel more like those movies that I mentioned that were like the drive-in B movies and so on,
Mhm.
like that, you know, proper hamming it up, being the tough guy and so on. But his mission is survival, and he will do exactly what he has to survive. But the way that Dwayne Jones does it is very real. And what makes that important is that at the time, there wasn't many people that were trying to create real performances and real people within movies, rather than a very out there character or a standard character or performance for that time in the 60s, and obviously nearer the end of the 60s. So once again, it's another tick box that this movie has where you're like, oh, okay, well, like this moment or this is an influence, or okay, this performance is an influence, because from this point onwards, performances in movies were different, because it was like, oh shit, maybe we don't have to make everything feel like, you know, Punch and fucking Judy, or you
Yeah.
know, like we don't have to make everything feel like a theater piece. We can actually create things that make you more scared, or more threatened by what you're watching, because it feels real. But the people that you're seeing on the screen feel like the people that could be sitting around you, but they're just in this insane circumstance where there's people trying to eat your brains. So I always say this, but it's such you know, it's one of those movies that I look at and I go, do you know what? Like Dwayne Jones will always have my respect for what he did in this movie, because of the way that he played that character and gives a different dimension to this movie, but also a movie of that time that has once again had an influence of what everything came back after it. So yeah, it's a huge deal. It's a really huge deal. His performances, and it's a
Oh,
very very good one. Everybody else, yeah, they're going for that full theater piece and going fucking absolutely ballistic and
oh
shouting,
man.
and but it's fun. It makes it fun.
It does. It does. It doesn't take away from the film. Like, the guy who plays Tom, he's probably the worst actor, but that's
Yeah,
okay. I'm not critiquing this film as far as the acting. I because I know the background. I know what Mero had to do to make this film. And in a way, it gives this charm, right? It's charming, right? We know how low budget this film was made for, right? And so he did the best he could with the actors he had, but its movie does rest on Dwayne Jones' shoulders, literatively and figuratively, and he is carrying hundreds of years of history of African Americans on his shoulders in this film, and he knows it, man.
yeah,
Right? He knows I'm sure he's read the script. He's like, oh, Ben dies at the end by a bunch of rednecks. Okay,
mm,
like there's no subtext there, man. It's in your
no,
face,
yeah.
and we'll get to the end, but it's fucking powerful, dude.
Yeah, it really is. And but this is the movie, and as I said, this is essentially what the movie. We're introduced to these characters, and our journey is with these characters, and it's all about survival, and that is essentially what the movie is. In between all these survival moments, like I said to you, one of the reasons why this movie is so important to what horror was afterwards, and definitely made people look at this movie to go, shit, this is how we can create the horror genre. Like, I feel like this is one of the movies. Horror existed before this, but I genuinely do believe that this is one of the movies that created the horror genre that we know now.
Mhm.
You know, and a lot of that was through the tension and the dread that this movie creates, but a lot of that was through what I've already mentioned as well, is the violent nature and how aggressive
The
this movie is.
Yeah,
You know,
it crossed the line, man. This movie crossed the line, and
yeah, absolutely.
which
I mean,
which
you
was not crossed before, and a
no, I mean,
lot of
you've got
taboos were broken.
yet you've got how vicious, like the Walking Dead themselves, the living dead, how vicious they are when they are attacking anyway, and you feel that sense in the movie, the way that it's filmed, the way that they are, they're proper going at it, and you're like, shit, this feels like real, like this is actually like, oh shit, like if you were in this situation, well, that's not a good situation to be in, and the film plays on that aggressiveness and that violence from what the zombies are in this movie really, really well. But also, it's the viciousness of Ben as well as his character trying to survive. And he also has a lot of really good ideas. Like he knows, and they find out that they're scared of fire. So what's the first thing he does or whatever? He's just like, shit, I'm just going to set one of their bodies on fire and chuck it out for them, and then they won't cross the door. You know what I mean? And I'm like, for one, it's a cool moment because you're like, oh, okay, what a great idea. But then once again, it comes back to when you start realizing the violent nature of what George A. Romero is creating with this movie by going, I'm just, because to him to Dwayne in the, well, to Ben, sorry, in the movie, he's just trying to survive. So, but to us watching it, you're like, shit, he's just set that person on fire, dead or not, without really giving a shit about it and just chucking it out there just to try and survive. So the way he does that, the way he's burning the body, the way that these zombies are so violent, coming towards all the people that that they get their hands on and so on like that. It is, but it's still incredibly apparent that for the time it was incredibly stark imagery that definitely would have been something very tough for them to watch back then. But even to this day, like I said, it shows the influence on the violent nature of what horror can be and what after this film it created as we go into the 70s.
Yeah, man. I mean, like I said, Romero pretty much started the zombie subgenre, and all subsequent movies follow this recipe of, okay, we have an outside threat of zombies, but there is an internal threat, which is human against human, right? The clash of race, a clash of societal or like rich against poor. So it's always the human drama that make zombie movies a little more special, because yeah, there's undead coming in, but the villain in this movie to me is Harry, the guy who's wants to get that gun so he can be in charge, right? We got to go down into the basement. That's where we'll be safe. And Ben's like, no, we don't want to trap ourselves. So there's conflict. It's internal conflict between these two people. It's human drama. And that's the beauty of the zombie movie, is that even like a movie like Day of the Dead, which Romero made in '85, the third part of this series, that movie has some of the best gore ever, but it also has some of the best internal conflict, the human drama, between the army and the civilians or the scientists. And it's one of my favorite zombie movies, and across the board, you look at any zombie movie, it's what's going on inside that house that matters, not what outside the house. So, and
Yeah.
Romero started that all here, man. It all begins here.
Yeah, that's it. And you're exactly right. It's insane. And this is why this is a prime example of the movies that I wanted to talk about from day one when I even thought about doing this podcast, where I was like, oh, okay, like there are movies that are more than just the movies of the genre where we go, I've seen that one and this is how I think about it. This is a movie that, like I've said so many times, and like we've both said throughout it, that when you watch this as a movie, yeah, it's a movie, and you think about it how you do, how whether you like it or not. Of course, there might be people out there that don't like this movie, and there are people that absolutely love it. But it's a true example of the influence and the foundations of what everything came after it. And also, what's mad as well is when you think about it, is that this was '68, so like it was only like 5 years or so after that where you started getting like your like Black Christmas, and then you started getting Texas Chainsaw, and then you started getting Jaws, and then we started getting Halloween, and then we started, so the '70s is always going to be, like, for me, the decade where you're like, this is where like sort of horror really took the
For sure.
form of what it is. You know, like if we're talking in regards to a decade that is the iconography of horror, 70s is always it for me. I love the 80s horror, but the thing with 80s horror is that it was so much of it, you know. And I
Yeah.
love 80s horror, but like some of it was great, but loads of it was shit. But the gritty, the dark, the sadistic, the nihilistic approach of the 70s horror, like you mentioned, like we see in stuff like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Black Christmas, which is, I always say Black Christmas is one of those movies that's incredibly underappreciated. Because it is a very dark movie with one of the most dark endings that you'll ever see in a movie. And obviously, we'll talk about, you know, the dark and sad ending of this movie as well. But the 70s was incredibly important. But once again, then you start looking back and then you go, well, what was the movie that really felt like it was the influence to go to that step that we had next? And that is Night of the Living Dead, or one of the movies is Night of the Living Dead, because of the way that the movie is created, the way that it conducts itself, the way the performances are, the way that it looks. And for me, the viciousness and the aggressiveness of not just the zombies and the bad guys of the movie, but the fact that there is the aggressiveness and the violence of the main character, the good guy of the movie, who's there trying to survive. It's such an interesting movie that still to this day you're like, okay, they did this right, and there's a reason, and because they did it so right, then it started to create that influence that everything came in the 70s, you know, not that long after it, because then that's when we got so many movies coming, because they were like, shit, look at this movie, look how well this movie did, and as we know, that's what the Hollywood cycle is. If this movie does well, then they want to make 100
Sure.
like it.
Sure.
But yeah, it is a movie that created an influence and was the foundations for so much.
Oh man,
Um,
you're right
yeah,
about the 70s, dude. Like I always ask a lot of my guests on my podcast, Cradle to the Grave, wherever you get your podcast. Did you like that? Like that promotion, VP?
yeah, I love it.
I always ask a lot of my guests, what's your favorite decade in horror? 70s, 60s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. I would say across the board, a lot of them pick the 80s
Yeah,
because a lot of, my guests grew up around the 80s. And so there's a nostalgic factor. Also, a lot of fun horror films came out in the 80s, a lot of classic films, right? Me personally, I go with the 80s too. If I had to pick only one decade to watch for the rest of my life, it would be the 80s. But with that said, the 70s, there would be no 80s without the 70s, obviously. It laid the foundation for what came after. And again, my co-host Stephen Bissett, he mentioned once because he's older than me, so he saw a lot of these movies in the 70s opening night at the theater, and he told me his favorite decade is the 70s, and it was because when he said to me, like, when I went to go see these movies, Eric, I was legitimately I felt dangerous. It felt like I didn't know what I was going to get. I had the director of Carnosaur on on my podcast. Have you ever seen Carnosaur, BP?
I haven't seen it, no, but it sounds like the best film I've ever heard of. Oh,
If you like Jurassic Park, you'll love Carnosaur, man.
well, there we go then. I've got
Oh,
to
okay.
watch it.
It's like Jurassic Park's little kid brother. Anyway, I had Adam Simon on, and he was telling me about first time he saw The Exorcist back in the 70s. And he said to me he didn't know what The Exorcist was. He was young. His brother said, "Oh, I think it's a crime drama." He said he went in without his armor on, right? And that's why The Exorcist terrified him so much. And that's, I think, to me, what happened to a lot of people in the 70s with a lot of these exploitation movies that came out. Last House on the Left, Texas Chainsaw, The Exorcist, Halloween. People were going to see these movies. They didn't have their horror armor on. They didn't know what was going
They didn't
on,
have it. Yeah.
right? In the 80s, we had it because we knew, like, okay, fuck, we're ready for this, right? In the 70s, people weren't ready. And to me, I wish I could have seen a lot of these movies in the theater when they came out, because it would have been an amazing, terrifyingly horrifying experience. I'm jealous that Steven got to see Texas Chainsaw opening night at the drive-in. Like, fuck,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
yeah, yeah,
So,
absolutely.
but yeah, man, 70s, dude. Like, so many good classic films. And
Yeah,
Night of the Living Dead opened the doors for
exactly.
the 70s to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. And you're exactly right. That's a really good way of putting it, is that Night of the Living Dead. There are movies that, you know, the movie industry, so to speak, and obviously horror is definitely one of those movie like genres, but it's all about opening doors. What movie is going to be the movie that opens the door for what comes next? And you're exactly right. And that's a really good way of putting it, because we had Nosferatu that opened the doors to this, and the Universal Monsters opened the door to this, and Hitchcock opened the door to this, and it just
Mhm.
keeps going. And then we have
It's
something
an
that is,
endless river, man. It just
yeah,
keeps
that's
flowing,
it.
dude.
Absolutely. And then we get to 1968, where we have a movie like Night of the Living Dead that opens the doors. But I think that it opened all the doors, and that's what I think is so important about
Yeah.
No, I was going to say Nightmare on Elm Street, Night of the Living Dead, is because it is a movie, I think, that opened all the doors. The gloves were off in this movie, because they were
For
like,
sure.
George A. Romero created for me one of the first proper horror movies that then created what is the genre that came after it, to create the movies that we got in the 70s and so on, and everything. So irrelevant of what people think about this movie, whether it's a movie they like or whether they don't, or they've never seen it and then they go to it now and they're like, I don't know. One thing that is one of those movies that I think there's always a difference, and it doesn't mean that one's better or the other. Of course, it doesn't, because we're all fans of horror and it's this horror community. But I always feel there is a difference between somebody that enjoys the horror genre and somebody that enjoys the horror movies, and they're both the best way to be. It doesn't matter how you are. And I think somebody that loves the horror genre is somebody that is like, whether you like or the movie or not, it's about still understanding the impact that had on the genre and the importance of that movie that had on the genre. Whereas somebody that might just say, like, horror movies, for example, they're like, oh, I watched this movie, and that's their lane. That's as far as they need to go with it. Whereas, like, someone like me, for example, I like to, it's about deep diving into it, like, not just for the podcast, but just in my normal life, because I'm like, okay, I'm going to watch this old movie from the 60s and the 70s, and I'm either going to like it or I'm not. But I do want to know everything about it. I do want to know the influence that it had then, and I want to know the influence of what it has for horror or for cinema. And this is one of those movies. But one of the big things about this movie is the ending.
Mm,
And it's a very, very, it's quite a difficult ending, to be fair, to watch sometimes, because one, yes, it has the way that the subtext, like we've spoken about, that Romero, it says that obviously isn't there, but it is, like whether you say that it's not, it is there. And yeah, I think, like you rightly said, he's clever enough to understand, to know that it is there. So
mhm.
to fact that subtext is in there to show what they did, is so startling for the time, and for now, and so on, like that. But the ending, I mean, it's a nihilistic ending. It's not a nice ending,
Dude,
and it's sad. It's a sad ending, but we got that in 68, rather than it ending that the hero saves the day and they're all fine. The hero dies.
the end, it's probably the main reason that Night of the Living Dead has stood the test of time is this movie kicks you in the fucking balls at the end, right? If you don't have balls, it kicks you in other places, right? So it's just it knocks you out, man. And you don't know, like, what the fuck did I just go through?
Mm,
And how am I feeling? Um, the end, I mean, again, you have Dwayne Jones as Ben. He survives until the end, and we're happy about that. Then he gets shot, and then the film goes into these still black grainy images of Ben being carried out by this posse, um, with hooks, and it reflects, and it obviously Romero knew what he was doing when he decided to film it that way, to show it what happened to Ben this way. It echoes lynchings, from the South during not only that time, but years prior, um, of people being lynched and being thrown onto the fire or whatever. Or you can't help but feel that you know what's happening. You know what Romero is trying to say. Like I said, there's no subtext in that ending. It's there. It's like, no, man, here's what's happening in America. And it's powerful, man.
Yeah.
It's one of the best endings of any horror film.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a powerful ending, and it is such a gut punch when you spend your whole time wanting this character to win, wanting this character to survive. And the fact that he doesn't get to, or he sort of does, until it's the humans that get him. It's the real people and not the zombies. He
Mhm.
survives the night, and of course, if he was to survive, and get out the house, and of course, like, he goes on to Dawn of the Dead and so on, like he goes on to trying to survive in the world that George A. Romero created. But the fact that his life is ended by by human hand, and the way that it is, and once again, the stark and violent and aggressive imagery that we see at the end, it's one of those moments where you sit there and you can't think of anything else. Like, like you're sometimes when you're watching movies, your mind wanders or something like that. But it's one of those endings where you sit there and your brain only can think, or just having it, that those images, that scene, that ending, where you're
Mhm.
like, and then when you finish watching it, you're like, like it hits you, you actually hits you on an emotional level, because you're like, that's such a fucked up ending. And you're right, and I think it is definitely 100% one of those endings that will always go down as one of the most difficult endings that you'll ever
Yeah,
see.
man. It set the stage, like we've already said. It set the stage for the 70s, right? Romero's like, okay, 70s, here you go. This is how horror's gonna be. Fucking have fun with it.
Yeah, that's
because
it. Yeah,
because
see you later.
before that, we had directors like Hitchcock and Polanski, who are making pretty cool horror flicks. But I look at Psycho, right?
Yeah,
Masterful, and so influential. But the ending of Psycho, man, it's a cop out to me, where we get this police guy's like, well, here's what happened, right? He gives us this explanation. We don't need it, man. Like, we don't need to be tied up in a bow, but audiences did, and I guess Hitchcock felt like he had to do that, right? We have
yeah.
to coddle the audience because we're not ready for this absolute terrifying horror. Romero's like, no, man, fuck that. This is true. This is what's going on. This is real horror.
This is horror. Yeah,
I'm gonna shove it in your face. And so that's what I said. He crossed lines, man, that other directors were not willing to cross. And and then, like you said, it opened the doors for directors like Wes Craven and Toby Hooper to cross that line, right?
yeah,
And because they're like, well, fucking Romero did it, so I'm
yeah.
gonna do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. So there we go. Well, anyway, so we're gonna get. I mean, that look, we've gone into detail about the movie, how we feel about it, the importance of it, and we go through very quickly our overall thoughts in a minute. One of the things that I always do on the show is shove in a few production info and facts as well.
Hmm.
This movie is still one of the most profitable independent movies ever made. Still, it was made for 114,000, which obviously equivalent today, or in 2024, it's like nearly a million. But it grossed approximately 30 million, equivalent to around today, 260 million or so on. So, which is like 260 odd times its budget. So in 1968, this was a huge commercial success. And obviously, one of the things that drives that is the fact that it's a horror. One of the things that drives that is word of mouth, and people are probably puking and shitting themselves and so on like that. And that will obviously that's one of the great things about horror is it drives it. But still to this day, it's an incredibly commercially successful movie, and as I said at the start, still to this day, a critically successful movie, which is fantastic. The house used for this film was loaned to the filmmakers by the owner, who actually planned to demolish it anyway. When the production came across the farmhouse location, George A. Romero jokingly stated, "Well, we can do that for you." The production had to completely clean up the farmhouse to make it appear livable. And quite honestly, when you watch the movie, you wouldn't think it's a barn house ready for demolition. They actually did a really good job of creating like a livable space that these people are going to go in to protect themselves, at least for now. So I think they did a really great job with that.
Mhm.
Um, one of the big things that is always gone around the history of horror when you're talking about practical effects with this movie, that Bosco chocolate syrup was what was used to simulate the blood in the
Yummy.
film.
Sounds
I
good.
know, that's it. I mean, there's no like gross fucking like, gross made blood for this movie, Although, I suppose fake blood is always one of those things that, yeah, it sucks and it's all sticky. But at least they still, it's all sort of syrup and everything still. But back then, I would have definitely preferred to have a chocolate syrup shoved on me. I would have just chucked my head in some ice cream afterwards and just got and just gobbled it up. But the great thing is obviously the reason for doing that is because in a black and white movie, then the chocolate syrup showed up darker and made it more of an aggressive sort of color, where you're like, not only can I see it, but it feels like more stark. The imagery that you get from using it is definitely more more in your face and so on. And but yeah, that chocolate syrup, so they got to have that on set, and that's what created the blood in the movie. And obviously that's something that they do quite a lot on black and white movies. And then the last production info fact sort of I've got is while filming the final zombie attack scene, George A. Romero did not inform Dwayne Jones that Kyra Scone, Karen, who I think is the little kid, I think, that would sneak up and grab him from behind, which resulted in an authentically shocked reaction from the actor, who was not expecting the child zombie. So classic Romero there, where he's like, "Fuck it, if I want a jump scare in the movie, I want it to be as real as possible." And poor old Dwayne Jones had to get scared shitless by some kid jumping on him. Um, but yeah, once again, it's a movie that you could. I mean, look, there's so much more facts and information out there. So if you want to know more about the movie, all you've got to do is research it, because there is so much interesting stuff out there about this movie. Um, in regards to, so I always let my guests go first, but in regards to the movie itself, Eric, what are your overall thoughts on the movie itself?
Oh man, I mean, the last hour we've covered it all, dude. We've said it all. I mean, overall thoughts is this is a milestone. This is a horror milestone, and I would say just a cinematic milestone in the history of cinema in general, not just the horror genre. This is it has been preserved in the Library of Congress as a significant piece of art. You know, it was made for $3, but because of the talent behind it, namely Romero and Russo, the guy who helped write it, they put everything that they had into this film. You know, they had people that were acting, and they were also holding the boom mic. You know, like everybody had dual roles in this film. Romero shows up as an actor in this film.
Yeah, like on
He's
the
one of the
TV, and he
newsmen in Washington D.C. sequence,
without
right?
a beard for once.
With I know I had a double take. Is that Romero? He also shows up in Dawn of the Dead as a newsman too. So thought that was cool. Um, but it's such a pleasure to watch. I mentioned that sure there's some moments in the middle where it kind of sags a little bit, and where they're just kind of going through the motions of boarding things up and listening
Yeah,
to the radio and the TV. We get all this info dump about how zombies work and how to kill them and what is the possible cause of this. Was it the Venus probe that caused this radiation that caused the dead, right? But it's never really answered, and I think that's cool. I like that. I
Yeah.
like the ambiguity of it. I like how in Dawn of the Dead, you know, you have the character say, when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. That's fucking awesome, man. You know, we don't need to have an explanation why the dead are rising. They're there. Let's deal with it. Um, and we get the human drama, like I mentioned, you know, where a situation like this will bring out the best or the worst in people. And it does. You know, the character Harry, you know, he's a horrible human being. And probably you can tell like him and his wife have this contentious relationship even before the dead started coming back to life. They were
Yeah.
probably miserable fucks, right? And their daughter was subjected to this. She was probably miserable. Like mom and dad fight all the time. I fucking hate this. You know, the youth in 1968 were going through it as well, the counterculture. And so when that kid rises back from the dead and kills both their parents, fuck, right? People were like, holy shit, man, hell yeah, right? um, but it brings out this movie, the situation, like I said, it brings out the true nature of us. Ben rose to the challenge, man. He's like, no, man, okay, listen to me. I know what we're doing. We're going to do this, and this is how we're going to survive. Um, and then he has to deal with people who aren't that smart. When Tom goes out to fucking fill the gas, the car with gas, the truck with gas, what a fucking comedy of errors that is.
Yeah. Yeah. More.
Like, oh my god. And then, you know, his girlfriend runs out, I'm going with you. And it's just like, oh my god, you know, it's kind of funny. Like, but if people would have just listened to Ben, they would have made it out. But that's not the way it works.
Yeah.
So, and I can go on and on about, you know, how this movie, you know, influenced countless films since. But I think we really said it all, BP. I think
Yeah.
if you're any type of horror fan, this needs to be on a constant rotation in your life, at least every 5 years or so. You need to revisit. You need to pay respect to your elders. Like this is it, man. Like, all right, if you dig Train to Busan, guess what, man? You need to watch Night of the Living Dead because that's where it all started.
Yeah.
So, yeah, man, this movie's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. You're exactly right. I mean, we've just, you know, this is one of those episodes that it's clear from the start, like one, how we feel about this movie, but it's also clear from the start of how much we respect this movie. Not just enjoy the movie for what it is, but how much we have the respect or the understanding of how important this movie is. So there's not really much more I can say. Just apart from if you take the movie as a movie, you're right. There are moments where you're like, how much longer are they going to be, you know, hammering nails into here? How much longer have we got to have shots of Barbara looking like a fucking mental? You know, there is that lull in it, but when it gets going and it starts, if, as I said, if you take the movie on its own merits, taking all the iconography away from it, it's a violent movie. It's still, the violence still holds up. The practical effects are of the time, but does that mean that they suck? No, it's just fucking charming. You know,
Mhm.
the the performance from Dwayne Jones as Ben, as we've mentioned throughout this, is very influential for what everything came afterwards, and helped change what movie performances are. Because, like I said, you know, so much before was the Hollywood style of acting, you know, and it was, you know, hamming it up, and the theatre style of acting, and that when you started getting characters that felt more grounded in this realistic, you know, the in realism, it brought that extra dimension of threat and terror and dread to movies, especially horror, because you're like, shit, I could be in that situation. And that's what's great about you know, Ben as a character in this and the way that he's performed. It is, as I said, a stunning looking movie, even if it is the movie, the shots that do look a little bit like shit, or it feels like they're running with the camera because they've got to. But when they've got the setup shots, you know, the ones that feel very Hitchcock, they're stunning. The lighting's great. There's so many great moments in this movie, but like I said, if you go outside of the movie, it cannot be underestimated or understated the importance, irrelevant of whether you think this is a great movie or a piece of shit. And if you do, that's fine, but you cannot underestimate the importance of what this movie is to the modern day horror. Like you said at the start, Eric, this is the violent nature and tone, the nihilistic approach of the ending is what helped create the true horror genre from what we know it that went on into the 70s and so on like that. If we didn't have George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, I genuinely don't think that we would have the type of horrors that we now have in 2025. His influence as a director and as a filmmaker is apparent in this movie, but the movie's influence itself is incredibly integral to the genre that we both and so many of us out there in this horror community truly adore. And a lot of it is down to this bloody movie right here, Night of the Living
There
Dead. I
you
can't
go.
even bloody there we go. But anyway, so it's a truly fantastic movie, and even to this day, it's a joy to watch. But when you watch this movie, if you are a true fan of horror, then you sit there and you go, "Fuck!" Like how important is this movie on a scale to 1 to 10? How important is this movie? It's a 10 all the time. Because it's so integral to the existence of horror going forward.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely, it's absolutely bloody brilliant. On the show as well, one of the things I do is this segment, Your First Time. This is where you, the amazing horror community, I reach out to all of you where you send me over your first time horror movie memories. I pick one from the list and I read out on the show. For this one, we've got from the Virtual Insanity podcast. They sent this to me on Twix, which is what I call X and Twitter, just put together. But they sent me this, so make sure you go and follow them over on Twix. They put that their first horror movie was Poltergeist. It scared the crap out of them, and for some reason, that old dude was the scariest part. As I've gotten older, I find it hilarious to watch now. Now, I assume that he's talking about Poltergeist
Old
2
dude.
with
Oh
with
yeah.
Reverend Henry Kane. Is that his name? Henry Kane, I think it is.
It's Kane. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. But yeah, no, the creepy old dude. So I'm assuming that he's referencing Poltergeist too, but
Maybe
irrelevant.
he's
Obviously,
referencing. Maybe he's referencing the dad in Poltergeist. Was he creepy and old?
well, I mean, he got a little bit looked like he would like needed a few nights sleep
He did.
after a while. But yeah, that when you think about Poltergeist and stuff, obviously Poltergeist too, or if you once again, it all comes down to the word that I use and love. And quite honestly, I'm happy that I actually do understand what the word means for once because I'm thick as shit. But the iconography of what horror is, and Henry Kane, Reverend Henry Kane, whatever you want to call him, he's part of that iconography of horror because the amount of people and kids that he scared the shit out of back
Mhm.
then and still to this day, as a character, as a performance, fucking terrifying.
Oh
Those
yeah.
natchers, the big old smile, the hat, just iconic. So there's obviously it's going to scare the shit out of people. So I'm happy that he's he's his first time horror movie that he got scared shit by Reverend Henry Kane. I do always ask my guests. I'm pretty sure maybe at some point I've read it out on the show. But Eric, do you remember your first time horror memory?
The first time that I got into horror, like my first memory of horror
Yeah, anything that
ever,
you've got, anything you've bloody got.
I've talked about my one of my favorite memories, early memories of horror, many times on Cradle to the Grave, wherever you get your podcast. About how I must have been like I don't know 7 or 8 in the 70s. Growing up, I used to really love watching Christopher Lee movies. Right, those Dracula films. That was my introduction really into the world of horror. And I remember there was one morning, it was a Saturday morning, and it was overcast and gloomy. It was probably in December, wintertime, and Dracula Prince of Darkness was on, right? The 1966, I think it was 66, sequel to The Horror of Dracula with Christopher Lee. And I I was scared shitless, man. And I remember after watching it, it was I went out and I was walking around and just kind of like it was starting to drizzle a little bit, and I was so afraid of the nighttime that was coming. Like I knew that night Christopher Lee would be scratching at my window, and he
He was
would be
coming to get
after. He was coming to get me that night. I could feel it. I knew, like, I'm fucked, man.
you.
And I went to bed, and I had the covers up over my neck because BP. I don't know if you know this, but when you have the covers up over your neck, vampires can't bite you, man.
They can't
Right?
get your neck. Yeah,
That's
that's
the
it.
R for that. Oh
That's
well,
science.
we gotta
That's
let this
science.
kid go. um, and then, of course, I woke up the next morning. I wasn't bitten by Christopher Lee. I was still alive. I wasn't a vampire.
Thankfully, yeah.
And I couldn't fucking wait to do that again. If
Yeah.
that makes any sense, it's like an addict. Like that was my first hit, right? I'm like, fuck, that was so awesome. I
And then
can't
you became
wait.
the vampire for horror.
Yeah, man. Like that really sucked me in. It was the thrill of being scared, right? That got me. And that I was no looking back after that, man. I've been chasing the dragon ever since.
Absolutely. And that is the prime example of obviously one of the reasons why I do this segment on the show, because I truly love reading these stories and hearing my guest stories as well. But that's the thing, is that horror has this almost like Dracula himself, this sort of like seductiveness, this sort of like, it brings you into it, that there's something about it, like I've said this before, and I've said this, like I always feel a little bit different because I've never been scared by a horror movie. Even as a kid, I wasn't scared. I don't know what it is. My brain just somehow computed it like, oh, I'm putting something in the VHS player. I'm putting a tape in, and I could completely differentiate myself from what I was watching to the real world. So I've never been scared by a movie, which is a shame because I'd love to be. There are movies. There's only two movies that have ever had not scared me but had an impact on me. One of them being the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because it's just so fucked up. And the other movie was a movie called The Lost, and I think it was like 2005, 2006. People have heard me
I've
speak
seen
about
that.
The Lost before. It's a movie that I don't recommend to people because it's very, very fucked up. It's
Oh.
just such a dark
Well,
movie.
now that
But
you've said
also,
that,
now that I've said
everybody's
it,
gonna go check it out.
people will go and check it out. Go and check it out. It's on Tubi. But no, I'm not recommending it. But there's two movies, but it didn't matter because because even though my journey started where I wasn't scared by it, I was so obsessed with it from a very young age. Like by the time I was 10, I was obsessed with horror because I wanted to know all about it. I wanted to know how they created it. What I was watching on screen when I was watching things like The Evil Dead, I wanted to know how they did that. I
Mm.
wanted to know how they created it. And when you look at a movie like Evil Dead, for example, on such a small budget, and how they managed to create what they did and shoot what they did, like it's so highly influential to me as a person that enjoys horror, as a filmmaker, as somebody, it's so influential, horror is, to my life from an early point, from a very young age, that all of our journeys seem to be different, but our journeys also are the same because we start on our journey and we never stop and we keep going, and we want to keep watching more and finding more out, and then you get to us, and in 2025 you might be doing a podcast about
Exactly.
it. So yeah, so horror is incredibly important, but talking about horror and talking about something that's incredibly important, now, Eric, now it's your time to talk about the
Oh,
fantastic Cradle to the Grave. The
oh,
thing that you haven't promoted once since doing
like Cradle to the Grave. What's that? Oh, yeah, man.
this.
Cradle to the Grave is a podcast, horror movie podcast. So the premise of my horror movie podcast is I started in 19 I didn't start the podcast in 1971, but I started talking about movies in 1971. The year I was born, BP, was 1971. So I start at the cradle, right? I pick 10 movies or 12 movies, it depends, it varies, and have my guests come on. I have 10 to 12 guests come on each year of my life to talk about horror movies that meant a lot to me, meant a lot to my guests. And I've been making my way through every year of my life, and I am currently right now in the year 1996. About finished with 96. Be going into 97 next month. So on and so on. So I'll be going through until I reach modern time, and when I reach modern times, the podcast will probably end. I don't know. That's a few years away. I have a few ideas of what I want to do after, if I want, if I can, because as you know, BP, doing a podcast is a lot of work, and I have a lot of
Absolutely.
stuff, other things going on in my life. But I do. It's a labor of love. I make time for this. I make time to chat with you, the horror community. It's awesome. I'm loving it and having a great time. I get to, doing my own podcast. I've met so many awesome people through the podcast, reaching out to famous authors, musicians, actors, directors, podcasters, high school friends, everybody. I have I have a wide range of guests on my show, and I treat everybody the same. I want everybody to come on Cradle to the Grave and just feel relaxed, like we're just two blokes sitting across from each other at a diner, at a coffee shop,
You and a Mountain Dew.
drinking Mountain Dew and tea, talking bullshitting about movies. That's how Cradle to the Grave is. That's the atmosphere I want, and I'm having a blast doing it. So, yeah, you can
Yeah,
Google Cradle to the Grave. It's out there. Give me a listen. Email me if you want to be on the show. Come on, man. Anybody, I welcome all people.
absolutely. And I mean, like as I said, I've been on the show before. I love the show. I told you that before, and I do. I truly love. I love that you not only bring, like, you are a true fan of the genre. So as I am, and we have that sort of mutual connection there. But what I love is that we always have fun conversations, and you always have fun conversations with whoever your guest is on the show. And whether it's a movie that the guest is chosen because they like the movie, or if it's ones that they don't. I mean, I think I've been on your show. Well, Fallen, I think, will be the fourth time, and we've spoken about movies that I like. We've spoken about a movie that I don't like as much, and so on. But either way, it's always such a super
Yeah.
fun conversation. So everybody, if you, I know that you are, but if you aren't, for some stupid reason, you aren't, listening to Erik and on Cradle to the Grave, please make sure you head over to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anything like that. Obviously, head over to Instagram. You can
Yeah.
follow him on there, and you can get all the links and everything that you need to on there, because you won't regret it. Because if you love horror and you want to go that little step further to enjoy other people talking about horror, well, then that's what we're all doing when we're doing these podcasts, audio or video, whether it's YouTube. We're trying to have these very lovely, honest, heartfelt conversations and passionate conversations about this genre that we absolutely love, and obviously Erik does that on Cradle to the Grave extremely bloody well.
Right.
So there we go. So to close out the show, obviously, I always like to say a massive thank you to my creepazoids, my honorary creepazoids over on Patreon. They are the people that are going above and beyond to support me on my journey through horror with Let's Talk Horror. Of course, we have Jamie Burns, the disco doctor of death in himself. We've got Rob Miller, and we have Leighton Collins. They are my creepazoids on Patreon, and a huge shout out and a thank you to them. As I always say, if you want to know a little bit more about Patreon, just go to patreon.com. Search for the Let's Talk Horror channel. You find out a little bit more. If you thought to yourself, I enjoy the podcast, but I would love BP to talk about a movie of my choosing, that's what Patreon is there. I do exclusive episodes monthly on there called the Creep's Choice episodes, where they choose me a movie and I do a little review about it, like a little podcast episode about it, a solo episode. And trust me, I am very, very honest. As I've said on the show before, a lot of the times, especially like a movie like this movie, I talk about movies that I love, or there's a reason to talk about them. And if they're bad, there's a reason they're bad, and so on. But a lot of the time, they're giving me shit movies that they absolutely love that I'm fucking trashing, and I feel so fucking bad about it. I really, truly do. My creepzoids know that I feel bad about it, but at the same time, I've got to be as honest as I can. So if you want to know
Yes.
more, head over to patreon.com and find out. And it's not just for me, for anybody out there that makes and creates horror stuff or anything YouTube podcast that you like. A lot of the time they have a Patreon. You can help them out a little bit on there. But there we go. That is the episode. Look, nearly did it again. Nightmare on Elm Street. Night of the Living Dead is like I said, it is so important to what horror is that I don't even know it still to this day if we can contemplate how important it is, even though we've sat here for ages talking about it. It's just its very existence is what helped create the existence of what horror is today and has been for a long, long time. So kudos to George A. Romero, and kudos to A Night of the Living Dead, a very, very, very important movie in what is the iconography of horror. But Erik, thank you so much for
BP,
coming
can
on.
I ask you a question before we
Yeah, go
end?
on.
What's your favorite Night of the Living Dead sequel?
I knew you were going to ask this. I genuinely knew. And when I was thinking about it earlier, I was like, I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Oh, come on,
I
man. Pick one.
I can't. I can't. Honestly, I am the worst person in the world when it comes to, because my brain just won't let me give me a favorite for anything. Like, I just don't have a favorite. Like, if somebody says to me, "What's your favorite zombie movie?" I don't know. If somebody says your favorite body horror, if somebody says to me, "What's your favorite horror movie?" I just do not know. Um, I just enjoy. I like they
What's your
basically in
favorite
my
podcast?
yeah,
Cradle to the
absolutely.
grave, baby.
Yeah, I should have done like the voice, and then yeah, you should have done the voiceover. But yeah, I just enjoy what I enjoy, and then what I
I
think
respect that.
is shit. So I just yeah, it's very difficult, and also like I could say one of them, and then I'll go and watch all 3 or 4 or 5 or however many back to back, and then I'll be like, oh shit, actually no, this one's my favorite. It changes a lot. I think it's because my influence is so strong because I look at movies on 2 different perspectives. I look at the perspective as a movie, but I look at it on the perspective as a filmmaker as well. And so that's where I find it difficult because I'm like, well, this one might look better visually, but then this one's got a better story or better performances. So it's always really tough. So unfortunately, I'm fucking useless and I can't answer that question. So I apologize.
That's okay.
But what I do want is that if you're watching this, or you can go onto the socials as well after you've hopefully enjoyed this episode, you can let me or Erik know what your favorite out of the George A. Romero's, Dead, Dawn of the Dead. Why can't I Day of the Dead
Day of the
and
Dead,
fucking
Diary of the Dead, Survival of the
Land of the
Dead,
Dead?
Land of
That
the
one?
Dead. Yeah,
Fucking
yeah,
hell.
I
There's
know.
loads of them.
There's
But yeah, let us know whatever you think is your favourite one. But yeah, Night of the Living Dead is always going to have a soft spot for me. So, but yeah, thank you, Erik. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming on the show.
Yeah, man. It was awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. There we go. Well, listen, to the rest of you, you know where we are with Let's Talk Horror. We're on the socials. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure you give 5 stars reviews for Cradle to the Grave and Let's Talk Horror. But until next time, stay creepy, fuckers.
Let's
I
get
feel
into it.
bad that we're not a couple of tank top boys as well.
I was this close to
I
wearing
was this
my
close as well. I've
muscle
literally got one
shirt.
in the other room.
I was like, oh, okay.
Get the
Guns
guns
out,
out.
sun's out, guns out.
That's it. I know. That's why the lighting's good in here. Shows off the guns. Right.
You do got your kimono on though, so hey,
I know. I feel like a right tit. Right. Here we go. Right.
and you got to leave all that shit in, BP. Okay, don't edit. You
Yeah.
just
I'll put it in the
you got to leave
outtakes
the
or
you
something
got to
like
leave
that.
the bullshit in, bro.
Gotta leave the
Leave
bullshit
the
of me
bullshit.
talking about my fucking kimono looking t-shirt. Fucking hell.
Let's
What's
do it.
up, you creepy fucks? Oh, let's start. I'll start that again. Here we go. Right.
Oh, sorry,
I'm gonna.
dude. I'm
No,
fucking
that's
up
all right.
your podcast, man.
No, that's all right. There's
Okay.
no one that can fuck this podcast up more than me. So don't worry about it. Right. Here we go.
I'm gonna drink while you're doing the intro
You
so I
drink
don't fuck
while
it
I
up.
say it. Here we go. Right. Here we go.